Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking and discussing about the power supply of a PC. So let's get right into it. Okay, so to start off, what is a power supply? The power supply is one of the most important parts of any computer, and without it, none of the other components can function. It usually sits at the bottom of the case, so it's one of the most overlooked components, but it is essential to regulate and supply power to all the components inside of the PC. The power supply has two main jobs. The first is called rectification. Rectification is the process of turning AC current into DC current. So, what does this mean? If we take a look at our outlets, they provide something called alternating current or AC current. AC current, as you can see, it alternates between the positive and negative sides. And it is used in transmission lines and it comes from our outlets because it's easy to increase the number of voltage being supplied. It's very easy to work with. To go from 100 volts to 200 volts, it's easy to work with. However, most of our devices, almost all of them, such as, phones, laptops, even desktop PCs, they use something called direct current, which is a flat line and a solid current being drawn. So our components use this because AC current is alternating between the positive and negative side, which is equivalent to flipping the device on and off. And this creates a lot of heat and it's a lot of wasted energy. DC current, on the other hand, there's not as much as power loss. So the power supply's job is to turn this alternating current into DC current. So from the outlet, it provides the alternating current. It comes into the power supply, and the power supply provides direct current to the desktop PC. The second step that the power supply has to do is something called transformation. Transformation is the process of stepping up or stepping down, which means increasing or decreasing the amount of voltage. So let's take a look at the power supply. The power supply supplies the power to something called the power rails. Now, the power rails are located on the motherboard, and from the power rails, each component draws the necessary power it needs. So the power supply supplies power to the power rails, and from the power rails, each component draws the current that they need. However, it the the power supplied from the outlet, the 120 volts in America, that's what it is, it cannot be used on these power rails. It's way too much for these power rails to handle. It takes a lot less voltage. It can't handle that much. So to turn the 120 volts into something lower, it's a process called transformation. Now, usually the 120 volts supplied is transformed into voltages such as 12, 5, and 3.3. These are the most common power rails. And this process allows the power rails to now store this amount of voltage, and the components can draw a small amounts of current whenever they need. So that's the second part, transformation. The third part is called regulation. So regulation is essentially a simple feedback loop. When the power supply is supplying power to the voltage rail, so let's say it's supplying 12 volts. Then let's say it goes above 12 volts and it reaches 12.2. Then the power supply knows it has to decrease the amount of voltage it is supplying, and it decreases it back down to 12. And similarly, if it's 11.8, it'll increase the amount of voltage so that it is supplying the correct amount of voltage to the power supply. So its regulation is the third step. One of the first specifications you're going to notice on your power supply when you're buying it is its wattage. Now, wattage represents the maximum amount of power the power supply can deliver. A very common misconception is that a 1,000 watt power supply can always supplies 1,000 watts from the wall. That's not true. The computer only draws the power it actually needs to. The power supply makes that amount available for the computer. Usually, when you calculate the total amount of power that you need when adding the specifics from every single component, you want to add a little bit of buffer just in case that it needs that extra amount, and it will be able to provide that. So, for example, there's a lot of different wattages that are available. It goes from 550 to even 1,000 plus wattage power supplies. Now, with that being said, not all power supplies convert electricity equally efficiently. Some energy is always going to be lost as heat. So to measure the efficiency, manufacturers use what's called the 80 plus certification system. And so you can see the different types of levels. There's bronze, silver, gold, platinum, titanium, and ruby. The higher ratings usually mean that less energy is wasted, and because there's lower heat production, and then it's probably going to be quieter because the cooling fans don't need to do as much work. But for many builders, for PCs, the top three are pretty much overkill. So a good balance between cost and performance is going to be the gold um, efficiency. And so, yeah, the power supply is responsible for converting AC power from the wall into stable DC power required by your computer. And when you're buying your power supply, you want to pay attention to the efficiency and the wattage. And so, yeah, this is the basics of what a power supply does: transformation, rectification, and regulation. Of course, there's a lot more that the power supply does, and you can zoom into the specifics, but these are the fundamentals. So, yeah, thank you for watching.